In the remote, mist-veiled forests of northern United States and Canada, whispers linger of an ancient, ominous presence that roams these lands. Local native tribes have long known of it, a dark, terrifying creature cursed with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. It's said that this ancient, malevolent being has lurked in these wild woods since time immemorial. However, recent accounts hint that its shadow might now stretch far beyond the wilderness. Could it be that even the bustling cities are no longer beyond the reach of the Wendigo's haunting presence? Many who claim to have glimpsed the Wendigo report sightings clustered in the far north of America, especially along the dense, shadowed forests bordering Canada. It's here, deep within the oral histories of the native tribes who first called these lands home, that some of the earliest records of this twisted force are found. These tales recount men, driven mad by dark spirits, who engage in forbidden rituals, transforming themselves into monstrous creatures, cursed beings that roam among the very communities they once cherished. As the legend of this flesh-craving entity grew, stories of encounters began to ripple far beyond its origin, spreading across the states. Reports of shadowy figures resembling apes or wolves surface frequently, but even more haunting are tales of ghostly, pale figures lurking just within the forests at the edges of towns. These eerie intruders, with their soulless, glimmering eyes, possess a horrifying ability to echo the voices of loved ones, luring their prey. Those who manage to escape describe feeling as though they had evaded a fate far more chilling than death itself. Some speculate that these creatures may be responsible for countless disappearances, hinted at by the disturbingly frequent missing persons reports that mark rural America. In the summer of 2019, Bradley Clark, a former Marine, found himself at a crossroads, seeking new work. With time on his hands, he reconnected with old friends, including Jacob, who had recently moved to a secluded community in northern Alabama, close to the Tennessee border. Eager for a break, Bradley accepted Jacob's invitation for a weekend getaway. During his stay, the friends decided to go on a hunting excursion, though opting to remain near Jacob's home for safety. As day began to give way to the amber hues of dusk, they decided it was time to make their way back. The return was uneventful until a sudden commotion deep within the woods drew their attention. Weapons at the ready, the pair stood alert, uncertain whether they would face predator or prey. After a tense silence, a group of coyotes broke from the trees, darting across the trail in apparent panic. While rare, coyote attacks can be dangerous, so the two remained cautious. Yet, to their surprise, the coyotes ignored them entirely, racing by without a glance before vanishing into the woods beyond. Just as they began to let their guard down, another noise broke the stillness. This sound was different, heavier, purposeful, as though something much larger was approaching through the brush. The air in the forest grew thick and suffocating, almost as though the very essence of nature had paused, holding its breath in anxious anticipation. Then, without warning, the calm was shattered. A thunderous crash split the silence, echoing through the trees as an enormous pine toppled onto the path, blocking Bradley and Jacob's way forward. For a breathless moment, everything fell silent once again. The two men shared a look, their eyes reflecting an unspoken dread, each wondering what they should do next. And then they heard it, a voice calling from beyond the fallen tree, a voice both painfully familiar and impossible. It was Jacob's younger sister, Olivia, her tones strained with desperation, her cries pleading for help. In an instant, Bradley moved toward the voice, but Jacob seized his arm, his grip iron hard, his voice a shaky whisper of pure terror. "It can't be her," he murmured. "She doesn't know we're here, and there's no way she could have reached the forest." Despite this logic, Olivia's cries continued, insistent and sorrowful, her voice trembling as she begged for rescue, claiming she was trapped behind the tree. The men stood rooted to the spot, every fiber of their being alert to the unnatural tension creeping around them. A gnawing feeling that something was horrendously wrong held them in check. Suddenly, as if a spell had broken, her voice stopped. And then from the shadowed side of the fallen pine, something else emerged, something that clawed at the depths of their primal fears. Looming out of the darkness, it stood, grotesque and ghastly, a towering figure that scraped the night sky at nearly 9 feet. Its skeletal frame was cloaked in skin that seemed to have been leached of life, pulled taut over its bones in a deathly, corpse-like stretch. From its hollowed, gaunt face, 2 gleaming, icy blue eyes stared back, devoid of any human warmth, glowing with a malevolent rage that seemed to pulse in the air between them. Instinct took over as Bradley raised his rifle, but Jacob pulled him back, his voice hoarse with urgency. "Run! Get to the truck!" And without a second thought, they bolted through the dense forest, branches clawing at them as they pushed forward, stealing backward glances to see if the nightmare was following. The forest thickened, obscuring their view, but they did not slow until they reached the safety of the vehicle. Inside, finally catching their breath as they sped down the dirt road, Bradley found his voice, though it trembled. What was that?" Jacob, his face pale, shook his head, eyes wide as he admitted he didn't know for certain. Yet, he recounted the stories he had heard, whispers passed down through family and friends, tales of creatures immune to bullets, beings that could dissolve a man without a trace. This was why he had insisted they flee. In the nearby woods, he said, many hunters had vanished, their belongings later discovered, discarded deep in the wilderness. Neither spoke further of the event, though the moment they arrived home, Jacob frantically called to ensure Olivia was safe. To his profound relief, she was, having spent the day at home, nowhere near the forest. It might seem that the southern stretches of Tennessee are far too removed from the Wendigo's typical northern haunt, yet reports like these are growing. Sightings suggest that this dark presence may no longer be confined to the icy, remote regions of the north, if, indeed, it ever was. One autumn night in 2015, another unsettling event unfolded. Adam Reed, a police officer from Houston, Texas, was just wrapping up a shift when he agreed to give his friend Luke a ride home. Living on neighboring farms in a small rural town, the two often shared rides into the city, especially on late nights. After a quick call home to check on his children, Adam headed toward the bar district to pick Luke up. They chatted about the night's events, family updates, and weekend plans, just like any other night. But as they turned off the highway and onto the winding path that led to Luke's property, something unusual caught Adam's attention. Near a fire pit Luke had dug earlier that year, 2 eerie lights flickered in the darkness. The pit was several feet deep, and yet 2 points of light gleamed from within, like eyes staring back at them, unblinking and menacing. Adam stopped the car about 40 yards away, and both men sat in silence, staring. The lights blinked in unison, disappearing momentarily before reappearing as if watching them intently. Believing there might be intruders lurking on Luke's land, they decided to investigate. Adam, ever prepared, retrieved his handgun and cautiously approached the pit, scanning the area with the truck's headlights. Meanwhile, Luke darted into his house, emerging moments later with a rifle. Despite his experience as a police officer, Adam felt a prickling unease as he approached the edge of the pit. But when he looked down, it was empty. Just then, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. At first, he thought it was Luke returning, but the steps were too heavy, too deliberate. A gunshot split the night, and he whirled around to see Luke, standing frozen on the porch, his rifle aimed at something in the distance, terror etched into his face. Adam turned to see what had rattled his friend, and there, moving toward the trees, was a towering, lanky figure, its ghostly skin gleaming under the night sky. He estimated it was at least 8 feet tall, with unnaturally long arms and legs that moved with a strange, fluid grace. As it neared the tree line, it paused, turning back to face them. Its eyes, glowing with the same spectral light that had caught their attention, stared back, hauntingly unblinking, before it disappeared into the woods. Both men, hearts pounding with adrenaline and terror, opened fire, the sound of their shots piercing the otherwise silent night. Yet the creature remained unaffected, merely turning with a chilling indifference before vanishing into the shadowed depths of the forest. Driven by a mix of fear and a fierce determination, they dashed to Luke's house to grab flashlights, and without hesitation, plunged into the darkness in pursuit of the horrifying figure. For what felt like an eternity, they combed through the dense forest, their lights cutting through the shadows as they hunted desperately for any sign that their bullets had met their target. Just as they began to think the pursuit might be hopeless, a soft rustling above them sent a chill down their spines. Luke aimed his light upwards, and there, perched on a high branch over 15 feet above the ground, were those same unnatural glowing eyes staring down at them. An earth-shaking, blood-curdling roar tore through the night, reverberating through the trees, filling them with a primal dread as the creature disappeared yet again, retreating into the blackness. Though fear clawed at them, the two men pressed on, their breaths heavy and rapid. They fired at shadows that danced on the edge of their vision and at every sound that seemed out of place. Heavy footfalls echoed in the night, leaves rustled in unnatural rhythms, yet each time they approached, the creature eluded them, slipping further into the night. At last, the woods grew silent once more, and it was as if the creature had vanished entirely. With dawn's light creeping over the horizon, Adam returned to Luke's property, and together they retraced their steps, hoping that daylight might reveal some sign, some clue as to what they had encountered. They found patches of the forest floor, where the dense underbrush had been flattened, as though a large, heavy creature had stormed through at great speed. Nearby, strange triangular impressions were stamped into the soft earth, the shape foreign and unidentifiable. Though both men were seasoned outdoorsmen, neither could explain the peculiar traces they had discovered, nor could they rationalize the events of the previous night. Across North America, native tribes have long debated the true nature of the Wendigo. To some, it is a wholly physical being, a creature of flesh imbued with mystical powers from realms beyond human understanding. To others, it is a spirit or demon, drawing upon dark, unearthly energies to ensnare the souls of those it preys upon. While certain cultures believe the Wendigo has the power to shift its form, much like the feared skinwalkers, others firmly deny this. One frigid night in late winter of 2010, a Canadian businessman named Robert Garvey found himself venturing back to his homeland to reconnect with family. The years had separated him from his roots, but his father and elder brother, James, welcomed him back warmly, eager to bridge the gap left by time and distance. They invited him to join them on a hunting trip north of their home, deep within the Canadian wilderness. Although Robert had never fully embraced the rustic upbringing of his youth, he accepted, wanting to spend time with his family. James lent Robert the necessary gear, and the next morning they set off, trekking through the twisting paths that snaked along a winding river. The day slipped away as they moved further into the wilderness, surrounded by the dense, snow-dusted woods, until the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. The men decided to set up camp beside the river, where the gentle sound of water lapping at the bank blended with the whisper of the wind. As the hours passed and darkness fully enveloped the forest, Robert felt the familiar call of nature. He wandered away from the campfire toward the riverbank, his flashlight cutting a path through the shadows. It was then that a sickening, putrid stench drifted toward him, thick and foul, coming from somewhere in the dense brush a few feet away. Grimacing, Robert turned his light toward the source, his heart hammering as he prepared himself for whatever might lie hidden in the dark. From within the shadows, a figure stepped forward, his older brother, James, his face lit by the beam of Robert's flashlight. Relief flooded Robert as James approached, extending a hand. "What's going on?" Robert asked, nervously laughing off his initial scare. "Did you smell that too? It's awful." But his relief quickly turned to confusion, and then to a growing unease. James didn't respond. He just stood there, that same unsettling smile plastered on his face, his gaze unblinking, piercing through Robert in a way that felt wrong, unnervingly wrong. As the silence stretched, Robert began to notice subtle changes. His brother's clothes, once snugly fitted, now seemed to hang awkwardly as though they were a size too big. And then horror filled his veins as he realized that it wasn't just the clothes. James's very skin appeared to sag, stretching and loosening as though it were slipping off his bones. His once familiar face began to distort, his features slackening in an unnatural way, his skin drooping like melted wax beneath a scorching flame. Frozen in terror, Robert could only watch as the illusion finally dissolved entirely, revealing something grotesque and inhuman standing in his brother's place. Before him now loomed a towering, emaciated figure, the hollow sockets where eyes should have been staring back, empty and soulless. Its mouth jutted forward unnaturally, resembling a snout, sharp and pointed like a predator's muzzle. In a panic-stricken scream, Robert turned, sprinting back toward the camp, but a searing pain shot through his leg as something gripped his ankle, yanking him to the ground. He thrashed wildly, kicking and twisting as he searched for anything he could use to fight off the monstrous being. Just as his desperation reached its peak, a deafening crack shattered the air, followed by a blinding flash of light. In that split second, the grip on his leg released, and he staggered to his feet, frantically scanning the shadows. His father stood nearby, rifle raised, his face set in grim determination. He fired another shot into the surrounding darkness for good measure before rushing to Robert's side. They stumbled back to the camp, where James was waiting, visibly alarmed, bewildered by the chaotic scene. Gasping for breath, Robert tried to piece together an explanation, his voice quivering as he recounted the horror he had just endured. But as Robert tried to explain the terror he had just endured, his older brother's response was not one of empathy or concern. Instead, James began to laugh, his voice laced with disbelief and mockery, his expression suggesting he found the whole ordeal absurd. Each laugh and dismissive word sparked something within Robert, a smoldering anger that grew with each moment his brother downplayed his fear and pain. Just as the tension was about to boil over, their father intervened, his tone grave, his face pale with worry. He too had witnessed something unexplainable, something that had left him shaken to the core. Their father lowered his flashlight toward Robert's leg, and the beam illuminated a deep gash etched across his skin, a wound that sliced right through his pants without leaving a trace on the fabric. Whatever creature had done this was no ordinary animal, and no typical explanation would suffice. In a strained silence, the men worked together to dress the wound, applying makeshift bandages as best they could before abandoning the camp, choosing to leave behind everything they'd brought in favor of reaching the safety of home as quickly as possible. The journey back was long and harrowing, every shadow cast by their flashlights seeming to ripple with unnatural movement as they trekked through the darkness, carrying the weight of an ancient fear that clung to them. The legend of the Wendigo sits in a strange, singular realm of the supernatural. This isn't a story born of isolated myths. Rather, it's a creature with tales that stretch back hundreds of years, a being spoken of across countless cultures and languages, from the earliest native tribes to European settlers who found themselves haunted by a strange, primal dread. Though most encounters take place within the shadowy depths of the woods, many modern sightings have cropped up on the edges of towns, hinting that this menace may not be confined to the wilderness alone. Unlike other cryptid sightings that skeptics often dismiss with scientific explanations, the Wendigo defies these easy answers. For instance, while some claim that sightings of Bigfoot are simply bears standing on their hind legs, and alien figures can be explained away as owls glowing under the moonlight, the Wendigo's abilities are vastly more otherworldly. The creature's powers, if witness reports are to be believed, are not just physical, but overwhelmingly supernatural. Take the story of Bradley Clark and Jacob, where the Wendigo seemingly mimicked the voice of Jacob's sister to lure them into the woods. Or consider Adam and Luke's encounter, where the creature's eyes shone so brightly they mistook them for flashlights in the dark of night. Then, of course, there's Robert's chilling experience, where the Wendigo appeared to take on his brother's form, deceiving him into a deadly trap. Skeptics, of course, have theories of their own. They attribute these horrifying encounters to hallucinations brought on by alcohol, or perhaps even the accidental consumption of hallucinogenic plants, such as certain types of mushrooms that grow wild in the woods. But such theories fall short when trying to explain why so many different people across such vast spans of time and space have described nearly identical creatures. Creatures with a twisted, insatiable hunger and powers that defy the natural world. For those who believe, the answer is both simpler and far more unsettling. They assert that the Wendigo is no mere legend. It is, they argue, a creature as real as the ground beneath our feet. A being that has roamed these lands since time immemorial. To them, the reason these tales have been shared and preserved for centuries is because these encounters are true. Whether it's a corporeal beast or a spectral entity remains a mystery, but it seems undeniable that there is something lurking in the woods, something beyond our understanding. Today, with modern communication connecting distant communities, these chilling encounters circulate more widely, giving rise to an unsettling possibility. There may be more lurking dangers in the wild places of America and Canada than we are prepared to acknowledge. Reports of shapeshifters and skinwalkers, entities woven deeply into Native American lore, have only increased, and certain regions, particularly those in remote, sparsely populated areas, show disturbingly high numbers of disappearances. Such reports lead some to wonder, could there be creatures in these secluded areas, preying upon those who wander too far from the beaten path? Are there forces beyond the natural, driven by a dark hunger that no human victim could ever sate? For those who dare to believe, this possibility is more than enough to keep them from the depths of the forest at night. The question that lingers, whispered in hushed tones, is chilling in its simplicity and its horror. If the Wendigo is real, can its appetite ever truly be satisfied?